Go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome to the second session of Empowered Learning 101. We are going to have a great conversation as we talk about, continue our conversation from last week about getting started. We're so excited to take this to Facebook Live and include a bunch of our viewers there as well. Sometimes that's easier than becoming getting on filling out your information and getting the Zoom link. But this week we're going to talk about getting started. Again, this is our second part, and we're going to focus on, we're going to focus, hold on. So we're going to focus on looking at your kids differently and how emotions affect the learning in your home. And this can be, used if you're even helping your children with homework. Some people hate homework just because of the way, we have to handle it at home. We're going to talk about learning styles and developing ways to increase that experimental learning. And we're going to set up your learning area as we're keeping our kids' needs in mind as well. And we're going to really discuss, I'm really big into that paradigm change and trying to learn some new learning ideas, changing that paradigm of learning to better prepare your children and yourself for your unique mission. Okay, well, first of all, I want to start with a big thank you to the Idaho Freedom Action. They're actually sponsoring these live webinars, these live weekly webinars that's going to last through the school year. And I appreciate their support and the ways they are helping us try to get this information. It's very needed information for free out to the public. I really appreciate that. Just first to introduce myself, my name is Rebecca Bowman. I am the host of the Luminous Mind podcast. I have been married for 26 years. I am a mother of 4 great kids. I call myself an accidental homeschooler. I've done some virtual schooling, different things like that. Started out with my youngest son, Nick. Actually, I was working on a charter school, started homeschooling him through a virtual school and just loved it so much that I continued it with the rest of our children. So I've been doing online homeschooling, different modalities for the last 16 years. I am not a professional presenter. Even though I have a podcast and stuff, I'm just, so if I sound really clunky, that's why. I'm not here to make money. This isn't going to be spammy at all. This is just like a free service to help families have more joyful learning experiences together. I call myself a learning enthusiast because as I got into learning different learning modalities, it just became a really interesting passion to me. And that's really helped me. That's kind of why I started the Luminous Mind podcast. It's all about changing those paradigms about how we learn. So we're going to start off with some group introductions. This is kind of when we're doing this Facebook Live, it might be harder, but if you like to introduce yourself in the chat of the Facebook Live, please do so. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dustin Hertz. He is actually our IFA representative, and he's actually moderating the chat. He's here to help me do a lot of that so I can just go ahead and do these sessions. Dustin, do you want to take a minute and just kind of introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dustin Hurst. I'm it's a newly minted title. I'm the Vice President of Idaho Freedom Foundation and Idaho Freedom Action. Idaho Freedom Action is a 501c4 social welfare organization, which basically allows us to do stuff like this and voter education for the betterment of Idahoans. Rebecca approached me with this project and said, hey, here's an idea. Here's something we're looking to do. Are you guys interested? And I jumped at the chance to participate because I believe that public schools are failing our kids. And I say that knowing that there are lots of good teachers out there who are trying really hard, but the system just isn't built for success in a lot of ways. There are kids who, of course, succeed in public schools, but by and large, public schools are failing our kids. And so I'm thrilled to have Rebecca be able to do this with us and to share her wisdom. And I'll say it again, Rebecca, you raise amazing kids who do very interesting things and follow their passions. I didn't grow up that way. I was a public school kid and I just kind of went to school and did what my teachers told me. And I have since broken out of that mold, but I want to learn more and go deeper into that process for my kids. And I want to help people in Idaho, parents in Idaho, especially in the COVID area, help their kids become self-directed learners. So thank you so much for being able to do this and doing this with us. And I look forward to our class tonight and our classes for the rest of the school year.
Yeah. Well, and you know, to kind of go off what he was saying too, is that I don't really think that we have to be homeschooling parents in order to implement some of these things. A lot of the things we're going to talk about will actually improve your home life with your children as well. Just to kind of go back and review what we talked about last week, just really fast, we talked about understanding that why, the importance of knowing our family goals. And I think that families that have a big why behind them of what their family is really about are going to be more likely to succeed. And then we want to create those goals with that reflect that why, because sometimes we're all focused on the what, you know, how are we going to, what curriculum are we going to use, or what's our schedule going to look like, or some of those things. But we really want to focus on that why, and what do we hope to get out of this. That helps us create a longevity of learning that I hope that we do. I hope that we all become self-directed learners. The second part is we talked about being the difference between a coach and a teacher. Sometimes when we bring our kids home, all of a sudden we're a teacher. And a lot of the ways that we parent are actually a reflection of that public education, where there's a lot of force, a lot of authoritarian force behind that. And it actually is very harmful to our relationships, I believe. And that's really, we're going to kind of drive that theme home over and over and over, the value of those relationships that we want to cultivate in our families. We talked a tiny bit about how emotions affect our learning. We're gonna dive into that a little deeper tonight. And then we really made a clear definition of being a collaborative learning, you know, partner with our kids, or a learning coach, or a mentor for them, whatever you want to call yourself, versus a teacher mentality, because it makes a big difference in how we approach learning with our children. But tonight, we're going to talk about that second part of getting started. We're really going to focus on changing that paradigm about education, about how that fits with your family life, and how to really mentor that learning for our kids. We're going to look, places we're going to look at our relationships with our kids a lot differently than what we've been kind of conditioned to do through, public education with our children in the past. We're also going to learn to understand those learning styles and those unique gifts, and how we're going to set up our learning area as well as the environment in our home. I always love to provide resource pages for families that join these classes, because I think it's super vital that you become a learning enthusiast like myself, because that really does help to broaden your perspective, and it helps you to actually be able to provide the type of education that might be a better fit for your child than what that traditional model has shown us. We're going to talk a little bit about gentle parenting. There's a lot of different names for this, but I think it's super important to kind of change our mindset from that authoritarian parent where we are telling our children what to do, into being more of a guide, more of a resource, and more of a help to them, that we're moving through life with them. And we're there to kind of assist them. We're going to talk about learning styles. Also, some of the stuff that I just found recently, I'm so excited about. 10 ways to have amazing enthusiasm about learning. Experiential learning, and how, a lot of the ways that we were always made to learn. We see that with a baby, they're always striving to learn and to grow. And then somehow when we all of a sudden send them to school, the way that we want them to learn switches. And sometimes we never get that natural desire, that thirst that we all had to learn. We sometimes never even get it back. And so this was a really great YouTube video to watch, as well as 8 things to know about that experiential learning cycle that we're going to discuss tonight. A great book that I just found. I actually have not read it other than, studying this philosophy for tonight, but it's a book by David Kolb, I think, and it's Experiential Learning. He actually wrote it in like 1984. But I think it's so important, like as we school our children at home, that we can really create that lifelong love of learners. And I think that that should hopefully be all of our why, that we're not just trying to get our kids to 18, where they can pass the tests and out of the house, that we're trying to create people who love to learn and can educate themselves. And then a great podcast to listen to that I did with Carol Ludwig was Humility is the New Smart. Super important to teach that humility, and how we talk a lot about how relearning is actually the new thing that we have to focus with our kids, because technology and knowledge is moving so quickly that we can't really sit down and show them, like give them information that they have to memorize anymore. We have to be teaching them always to constantly be unlearning and then relearning to have success in life. And then also positive emotions. And this, for some reason, is not, it looks like that link isn't. And I don't know if you can click on these, Dustin, is that?
You can't, but we can include links and emails to attendees if people are interested.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll have to, if you're interested, please go to the IFA. I mean, is there a place that we should send them for this? They can always go to the Luminous Mind, and I'll try to.
Let's work on that. Yes.
Okay.
We'll come up with something. Yep.
Okay. So as we start thinking about the environment, the learning environment that we want to have for in our home, it's really important to think about the ways that we discipline our children. Last week we talked about all those hats that we wear as parents, and sometimes when we bring the learning home, it just adds one more extra hat, one more extra stress that we have. And we talked about last week how that title that we have as mom, dad, grandma, I just put mom on this because anyway, just for emphasis, but that is the most important hat that we can have. And we want to be sure that we don't start thinking of ourselves as a teacher, because I think when we think of ourselves as a teacher, we become very authoritarian. We want to be sure that we're putting that relationship first. But we also want to learn to look at that relationship a lot differently than maybe what we were taught in the past. I had great parents. They did a lot of spanking, all of that kind of thing. But I think I love the slide here that talks about the job of each generation should be to solve more problems than we create, and to lift up the next generation to be better than the last. We have to constantly be sending our children to counseling to deal with their the way they were raised, I don't think that's a better way. And I think there are better ways. I'm not totally advocating letting the children run the household or anything, but I'm talking about working together as a family, having that family unit have a mission together and have purpose together and build that relationship. When you think about, well, this is how my parents did it and I turn out fine. It was good enough for me. I want to expand that. I don't want to just have children that survive childhood, but that they thrive in it. So we really have to check our emotions more often when we have children underfoot. I feel like if we feel ourselves getting angry, if we feel that frustration, we want to be sure that we are, removing ourselves from the situation, putting ourselves in timeout before we get to the point of full-blown anger.
Can I add one
Sure.
just one quick story? It just happened to me like about 30 minutes ago. I was at the park here in Boise playing baseball with my kids. And my kids, my son is 8, my daughter is 6. And I was trying to teach them how to play baseball. They don't know. I mean, Lincoln knows some. My son knows some, but doesn't know everything. And, I was trying to teach them, here's how you square up to the plate. Here's how you hold the bat. Here's how you put your elbow up. And I was getting really frustrated. And I was kind of patting myself on the back, like, hey, it's okay if you're being, a little bit more forceful or coercive with your kids. You're teaching them the game. And then instantly I thought, but you're also teaching them that it's not fun to play and that dad doesn't teach well. So,
or
yes.
how they should deal with other people, when they're trying to teach them. That's
Absolutely.
Also very important.
Absolutely.
And that's what, as a parent, I think we should always be striving to model good communication with our children, because they'll learn their communication skills from us, and then also how to deal with people in a patient and kind way, I think. This is one thing I wish I would have learned earlier, because I did start off homeschooling as a very authoritarian type of parent. And granted, I feel like I have a good relationship with my kids, but I feel like it could have been better. There are a lot of things that I regret now. And I really feel like when I finally switched to more of a peaceful approach to parenting versus that authoritarian parenting, family learning became much more peaceful for us, and we began to enjoy it a lot more. We were all involved in it, and I really feel like that's what brought so much joy. Oh, wait a minute. What happened to I wasn't done with that slide. Okay. So when we're working with children and we're setting up a schedule, we're trying to put together their work area. Let's try to bring our children involved in that. Let's get them involved in how they feel comfortable with that. I think too, teaching kids mindfulness about what works best for them will serve them all their lives. I mean, there's so much of my growing up that, now that I've become an adult, I realize I do things that aren't necessarily comfortable for me, aren't necessarily good for me, but that's the way I was taught. And I was taught like this, being an adult, is not fun. And that's not true. I don't believe that. We want to listen to them. We want to watch for frustration in them or yourself. If you see your children and as whatever they're learning, they're getting super frustrated, not to a good level at. I think that's really important. That book that I recommended last week, The Self-Driven Child, he talked about that a lot. Like learning can be frustrating, but sometimes that's exciting too, to have but if you don't see that excitement in their lives, that's really important. Take breaks when necessary and learn that child's learning style and explore those unique gifts for that life's mission. We're trying to educate the children for their time, not ours. The belief that being a parent imparts absolute control over another human being is a belief in tyranny. I'm not about tyranny. We're working with the Idaho Freedom Action. We're all about freedom. And so we want to start with freedom at the very root of our family, and it could possibly change the world, in my opinion. It's human nature to want to rebel against that tyranny. So if you're finding it's frustrating to work with your children at home, it's because they're pushing back against a tyranny. They're feeling that struggle. They're feeling some kind of that the power is being taken away from them. And every person pushes back against that. The simplest and most effective way to prevent resistance, defiance, or rebellion in our children is to treat them with the same kindness and courtesy and respect that we would naturally give another person. Some reason we always talk to our kids way worse than we would somebody else. And I would love to see that change in families where we're actually more kind and gentle to the people that are closest to us than we are I'd like to see everybody be kind, but we should start there for sure. So peaceful parenting, I know the book that I recommended, The Self-Driven Child, they talk about it different. It's like it is some type of other authoritarian parent, but it's meant with that peaceful approach. Is very mindful how everyone feels in that situation. Like I said, this should never be a situation where your children are just running rodshot over you. Your opinions also matter. But it's also important how we talk to our children about these things. Some great questions to ask yourself, and maybe there's people in the chat that want to ask a question or give some advice here. But what would you change about how you were raised? What's the end game for that relationship with your children? When they're out of the house, are they going to want to come back and visit you? They get to pick your nursing home, your rest home, whatever. What kind of place are they going to want to put you in? What are the actions that you're teaching your children? How are you teaching them to deal with their frustrations? So often children are punished for being human, and children we don't allow them to have grumpy moods or to have a bad day or have a disrespectful tone or a bad attitude. Yet we as adults have those all the time, and none of us are perfect, and we must stop holding our children up to a higher standard of perfection than we want to have for ourselves. Sometimes as a strict parents, we think that we're teaching them how to behave, but in actuality, a lot of times you're teaching them to hide those misbehaviors from you. Some kids find that exciting to do that. And then also how to manipulate somebody too, how to lie, how to do those kinds of things. If you're finding your children are having some of these behavioral problems, you might want to first look at yourself before just assuming they're a bad person, for sure. So we're going to talk about the power of positive emotions, and that was that very last link that didn't show up that we may have to send, but it's a very fascinating study on how positive emotions affect our learning. You know, in a school setting, and these come straight directly from that, but in a school setting, positive emotions are correlated with high levels of student engagement. We want our kids engaged, right, as they're learning, while negative emotions are associated with a low level of engagement. So if we see our kids are not engaged, there might be some negative emotions going on there. Students who experience more positive emotions throughout their school day or their learning may demonstrate greater coping skills. That should be a long-term thing, right? We're trying to create kids with good coping skills. Research reveals that experience positive emotions facilitates recovery from task experiences and such as test anxiety. That's a huge problem for a lot of kids. We're seeing just skyrocketing levels of anxiety and depression, and I think a lot of it is just that over testing that we're constantly doing with kids. Studies also suggest that a higher level of positive emotions predict higher grades and better math and reading skills in 2 years later in adolescence, as well as cognitive investments and level of satisfaction in those students. Such research supports ideas that including positive emotions in the classroom eliminates that fear of failure, self-consciousness, and other distractions in order to create that optimal condition of flow. And I think Dustin and I talked about that last time, about how we want to eliminate that fear of failure. And that's sometimes when we have that authoritarian mindset, our kids don't want to fail in front of us. They don't want to fail. They don't want to appear as the failure at all. And that can actually hurt their growth. And that's one reason why I suggested that podcast with the humility is the new smart, because she actually talks about that because we have this scared mentality of failing, it might be setting us back in learning as well. So we got to get rid of, that idea that failing is a bad thing in learning. And we should celebrate it. We should be like that Meet the Robinsons show, oh yay, you failed. Maybe not like quite like that, but definitely make it more of a positive thing. The broadened effect of positive emotions can give students a sense of mindfulness, motivation, and gratification that prompts them to feel more comfortable in their environment and eliminates anxieties that may prevent them from being wholly engaged in a task. And this was one thing I heard over and over and over again, that from parents, and I knew they were doing it right. I knew they were doing the schooling at home thing right when they saw the anxiety of their kids lessen because of the environment that they had at home. So if we can achieve that in our homes while they're trying to learn, it can really help. We want to achieve this good workflow. I wish I had good workflow sometimes, but this is kind of what Dustin was talking about last time too, about how we don't have to set a clock, for learning. We don't have to, we want to create this experience of workflow. And so those positive emotions are more associated with achievement, not simply because individuals left feeling better, but also because it broadened their mindset to help them to develop that ability to achieve flow. And that's really, I think if we can create that where learning is fun and creates this workflow, it's going to help them all their lives. During flow, challenge is conquered by the intrigue and ability induced by positive emotions. So thus, as educators, as parents guiding them through this learning experience, we may benefit when we create this family culture. I'm going to say it's a school culture, but if we're doing learning at home, a family culture of generating more positive ones. And I'm not saying we should be Pollyannish, because bad things happen all the time, all around us. But knowing how to deal with it, I think kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, that's really the key of knowing how to deal with the negative things that happen in our lives and being able to talk about those things, I think, are super important. But we should pull it away as much as we can from, separate that as much as we can from learning, to help kind of create that positive emotion for sure. If we can help students discover where those negative feelings are generated, then it's helpful. Then we can bring them back to work and be able to work through that in a better way. I wish I would have done that more of that as a parent. We worked through so many angry moments trying to get the schoolwork done, and I wish I would have pulled them away and like, let's talk about this. Why do you feel angry about this? What's your feelings about it? Because that will help them. Doing that will also help them with relationships with their people, or with people that are around them. Hopefully they end up being good spouses, or good co-workers, because they can express how they feel about something in a positive way, but still in a way that they can express those feelings to somebody. Okay, so learning styles, it kind of varies a lot, but I really think it's really important as we're doing the schooling in home that we take advantage of this unique learning style to customize that learning to the individual gifts of each of our children, and using their learning styles. This is just one example of learning styles, visual, auditory, and kinetics. But we have to keep this in mind, and like each person has their own love language. Each person also has their own way of learning. So we want to work with our child to make learning fit with your child's needs. And I had a test and I didn't put it on the sheet, but there's many free tests that you can take. And actually I started one and then I'm like, I got to finish my research for this. But there's many online tests that you can take to help you figure out what your child's learning style is, and also what your learning style is. I think it's important as a parent, like sometimes when we're working with our kids, we're trying to teach them in our way that might work for them, but for your child, it may not work. We're trying to teach what works for our learning style, but it may not work for your own kids. And let kids explore and have that valuable free time play. I think that's really important and then that helps them figure out what their learning style is, and it helps them figure out that learning can be fun. That other book that I recommended by Peter Gray is a great place to start. I think it was Free to Learn. He has also a lot of great YouTube videos on that about how, we did that a lot as kids. We had a lot of extra free time to play and explore as kids, and kids nowadays don't. This was just another thing that I pulled, that was just 3 learning styles that we had, but there's also other ways that kids are great learners. I had my son that I just sent off on a mission just yesterday. He was a very logical, mathematical brain, and that's how he learned a lot. I have my oldest son is more of a musical brain. He learns a lot through sound and different things like that. I'm trying to think, my daughter loves languages. She's very linguistic, and, but each one of these intelligences it's really important to find out what kind of intelligence your child has for sure. This was the exciting information I found, this experiential learning. And I talked to a parent last week about how I think this is something you can implement all your whole life, because this takes us back to that natural learning. But I think it's even more important to have our kids learn through this way. Well, it's always important, but as they get older, especially, I actually found it to be super helpful. I think when my kids hit about 14, they've got to have some application for their learning, or else it's just not any fun for them. And they find it boring. That's when you start hearing all that pushback, because they're not able to find the connection to where this learning fits in their life and how they're going to apply that. So this idea came from a psychologist back in 1984. He established this theory. I've already mentioned his book at the beginning. And to just kind of sum up what it's about, is that learning is a process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. And I think that's super easy to do when we choose to bring our kids home to do more of an experiential learning. And there's several ways we can do this, which we'll discuss in the next slide. But it really is a process that encourages that natural learning and helps us become lifelong love of learners. which I think is what we need to do. But it kind of starts here with the act, do, and experience. And then there's that reflective. If you've ever been in scouting, we always talked about the start, stop, continue, where we can look and we can assess what went well and what didn't go well. That's the second part in the red. And then moving into that sense of experience and drawing a conclusion, like, okay, well, this didn't work. And some of those videos actually explain it better than I'm doing now, but this didn't work. What changes can I make to have it work next time? And then testing that conclusion. And it's really interesting because our knowledge builds on each other. And so this is just a cycle that we do round and around and around again. And if we can implement this into life, all of a sudden it gives us application for learning. And we find how this works within the rest of our life. Like I said, I talked to a parent, and I feel like I'm going to sneeze. So hopefully I don't, but everybody pray for me. But
it's
we
the
talked,
Ronas.
yeah,
it's the
exactly. It's either that or those farmers. But as we talked about last week, after the class, last week I was contacted by a parent of, like, how can you get your high schooler or that middle school kid to be more invested in their education, because the pushing, it gets really old. The cool thing is the more you homeschool, they naturally become self-directed learners, and there's less pushing. I think if you're pulling your kids out and you're having to go through that deschooling process, like we talked about last time, where you're trying to change their mindset back to this natural way of learning, you're going to have a harder time. But the longer they do it, it becomes more of a flow for them, unless they're not really driving their education, or you've been driving it for them the whole time. If they've never had any buy-in to it, it may be even harder. But this project-based learning, this experimental learning, and this first picture here is just a random one that I found online, but I thought it was cool because she's learning how to do a motor through that, build a motor through that experience. I wish we had more schools like this. I know back east there are a lot of learning centers where this kind of experimenting is they just let kids go, and I think it's amazing. But I did find it useful, like I said, when my kids hit about 14, if you can find out what they love to do and then get them involved in that's so helpful for them to understand why education is so useful. That's what I found with my oldest two boys. We found groups for them to be involved in that was more project-based learning, and then they tried harder in school because they saw some application to it, for sure. And this is just that continued cycle. There's some great ideas though here on this slide. If you're looking at that CE, group exercises, field experiments, labs, internships. There's a company they called Praxis, and they actually, I think they're going to try to start working with high schoolers, but it's definitely a place to look for that experiential learning. Also, awesome people in the community. Many times my sons would be like, I think I'm interested in law. So we'd call up some lawyer in our church group, and they would go and shadow that person for a day. We did a ton of stuff like that. And like I said, any of those community experiences that pulls those teenagers out into the community and helps them feel like they have purpose is going to be so helpful. And then we want to discuss what happened. It's really important to always go back and what do we call that? Dustin, can you, if we can go back and we can kind of assess, what did you learn from that? And this is really helpful, in families. I think if we can always just pull them back and discuss, what challenges they had, what were things that they liked about it, and just kind of begin to debrief. That's the word.
Debrief.
Yeah, debrief.
We do those at work, and we're starting.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic process.
Yeah, and I actually encouraged my children a lot, and this happened a lot when we started traveling. Write in a journal. It's so important to get those feelings out about how you felt about this and that, and that helps you be able to understand what you liked about it and what could change. And then also finding that research, that became really important to my oldest son, and now I don't know what he's into anymore, but he began doing online courses with medicine and stuff, when he started doing this kind of thing with the local Explorers Club. got him super interested in medicine, and went and did a lot of research on his own about, all of these medical things, and it helps to drive their education. And then working with those test models, those scenarios, applying what they learned, super helpful. We're going to move on
I
to,
want to just jump in
go ahead.
here.
Yeah.
Katie, my friend Katie Donahue is, she's with us, and she just shared a comment, and she said her daughter Erilyn is interested in building a spacecraft someday. So,
Awesome.
or I guess spacecraft engines to be specific.
Awesome.
Just take it up a notch, I think.
Yeah.
So she and her stepdad are starting with a 75 Super Beetle. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, and that's great. And then that will get her, I feel like anytime we can do that, those types of exercises with our kids, especially our teens, it's going to make them feel like they have something to contribute. I feel like that's where depression is hitting our kids a lot, is because they don't feel like they have a place in society. And I just noticed with my 14-year, about 14, they really start to wonder, like, what do I have to offer this world? And if they're locked away in a building with other teenagers and they don't get out and get those experiences, I think we're going to see even more depression. So the more that we can find them those mentors, or find people who want to help with that, and building an engine, what a great thing to learn. That helps with, it creates that applied knowledge. Okay, so when we're talking about learning areas, I'm just gonna, I advertise that we're gonna talk a lot about this, but it's really, I guess the thing I wanna really focus on here of what your learning areas look like is that oftentimes we think that learning should be at a desk. You should be sitting there comfortably, but let's set up your learning area that's comfortable for your home and your lifestyle. I had an amazing schoolroom, where my kids each had their desks. They actually really liked it. And it wasn't until we moved that they were like, they missed that, because it was a place they could make a mess and not have me get upset, because I'm super anal about cleanliness, which I think is also very important when we're talking about experiential learning. And I have it down here that it can sometimes be really messy, and that's really hard when you're at home and living in the mess. I'm just somebody who can't do that, and my learning looks different than their learning. Mine's on the computer or different things like that. My projects are on the computer. Theirs were like messy. Kids are just messy, let's just say that. But it's really important that you create a place that maybe you allow that mess. I think it's important to teach them to clean it up too, but it's also important to give them the freedom to have that. You want to keep your kids' minds and needs in mind, and make it as comfortable for them as possible. Keep yourself open to new learning ideas. I think learning, deschooling is the most important for parents. I think that whenever we're going to start this learning at home situation, we have to really research, and because it is a different learning modality. When I heard about parents that were really struggling with the online learning, and it wasn't, they had teachers that were trying to basically implement public school at home, and it just doesn't work, and it's frustrating for everybody involved. I think the more that you can create a situation where we think outside the box and we go, okay, my kid, if he gets this math homework done in 5 minutes, does he have to really sit there for a half an hour and do other math things? If not, then let him move on to something else. And I think that's kind of where we're missing the mark. And I think maybe I have it on a different slide, but I think we need to be educational advocates for our kids. We force them to do way too much that is nonsensical. We create situations where they hate learning, they hate school, because it doesn't make any sense to them. It's not comfortable, it's too rigid, it's too frustrating. And I think we need to be our advocates for our children. We are, in fact, paying the bill for that education, regardless of whatever somebody wants to tell you. And so really work with your children on finding these learning styles. I mean, if you're doing some type of online learning connected to a school, we want to keep that in mind. These are some great questions to ask. What does your learning area look like? I'd love some responses in the chat if somebody wants to So tell us like what they've got set up. How were your children involved in creating that space? I have an interior design background, so I'm always like, oh, we got to make it look pretty. And my kids are like, but that's not useful for what I want, So how did you keep them involved in that? What's unique about the way that your student likes to learn? Like I said, we're educating them for their time, not ours. And so what's something unique about the ways that your kids learn? If there's anything in the chat or anything, Dustin?
I'll let you know. I haven't seen anything yet,
Okay.
but I know
Awesome.
that it's tough because like we live in an apartment right now because Boise house prices are just astronomically high. And so it's a little tough to find that space, but we find ways to make do, especially with a toddler who wants to be into everything, but you find ways to make it fun and interesting for them. And my wife is very practical, and she set up a nice space, but she also she has maps up on all the walls, so even when we're eating, like the kids are like, Dad, where's Texas? Dad, where's this? Dad, where's that? We, or Mom, where's that? We talk about that all the time. And just even those little things, even in confined spaces, can make a big difference. Now, Taylina, I think it's similar to mine. She says, kitchen table, I don't have much room. I also have an in-home daycare. So she's doing a lot. She's doing a lot over there. That's super parent right there. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be, if you can't give your kids, a dedicated learning space like at school, that's okay.
My kids use the kitchen table now. We don't have a dedicated learning space. So.
Right. And, we have some time where dedicated time where they go do math games on the iPad or whatever. So they take the iPad, they keep the door open, of course, but they go do it on their beds or whatever. And it works. So they go do it outside where the Wi-Fi can still reach. It works. And it's way better than just sitting in your hot public school classroom. I know I keep bagging on public schools, but it's way better because I remember those days, sitting and thinking about being outside. We let them go outside.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of had to laugh when we moved to the online thing. A lot of kids were wearing pajamas and they saw so much freedom in that. I mean, we homeschooled for years and we would have some pajama days, but my kids were like, that's gross. I feel gross doing that. But it just meant so much freedom to these kids that had never had that before. So yeah, as much as we can give them freedom to be comfortable and learning at the same time is just going to open up those brain neurons like we talked about, with those positive flow it's just helpful to learning. These are some ending slides that I have. I think it's really important, and I think that's what Dustin and I were trying to do as we were creating these free classes. Like I said, we're not selling anything. What we're trying to do is really create a community where you don't feel like you are all alone, which is our next slide. But it's really important as we're these two things, that we bring a funny bone along with this parenting journey. You have to find some humor in this. Humor is the universal language that topples all walls. It connects a lot of hearts. It opens doors of communication, cooperation. My husband and I, he's awesome at this. I have not learned how to be a gentle parent naturally. It comes very naturally to him. He finds ways to make it funny, and the kids, but then they want to learn. And I never underestimate, like, we never had long, serious discussions with our kids. We always had like 5 to 10 minute little snippets, but that makes a big difference in the long run of spreading those values with our kids. We got to keep a lot of joy and humor in our day. And so what are some things, like when you find yourself getting really frustrated, because it can be frustrating to have little kids underfoot and you feel like you're singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm like over and over, and it starts to feel like you're going crazy as an adult. But what are some things that you've found to be able to keep that joy and that humor in your day? These might be good things to journal about. It's always good to have a list of things that might help us so that we can kind of keep those positive emotions going. Like I said, the negative ones aren't bad because they should help us reflect, like, why am I feeling triggered? And learn from that. But it's very important to try to turn that around as much as possible. This is the part, talking about with Dustin and I, we want to create a situation where nobody feels alone. We're trying to create these weekly things where, sometimes when we're doing schooling at home, it feels very isolating. And anytime that you're feeling alone, just take a deep breath, just get present with the moment and ask yourself what's the most important thing that very second. That's why those why things that we talked about last time are super important. Dustin and I are also trying to work on, I want him to clip off the front beginning of our boring conversation as we're waiting for people in. But I'll set up, on my YouTube channel, even we could set up something where you can watch some of those recordings. And anytime that we can, like I said, build more community, we have an Idaho Facebook group of, what's it called, Dustin? Do you remember?
It's called Idaho Homeschooling Mentors. It hasn't been super active, but
I know.
I will start to spend a little bit more time there. I don't have much more time to spend anywhere, but I will get that going because there's a lot of us who are new to this and
great place to put the slides or some of these pages that I have with those clickable links. I'll put them there. You can also go to the Luminous Mind Facebook page, and I'll add it there as well. But that's what we're trying to do, is trying to create this feeling that you're not alone. Live in the now. Don't fret about the future, because it's going to turn out much better than you or anyone else thinks it is. Dustin always talks about how amazing my kids are. I do have children that have naturally chosen to do good things. And I know I had many friends that they were much better parents than I have ever been. And their kids, kids will be kids. They have their free agency to do what they want. But I think the most important thing that I did as a parent is that we really worked on that self-driven, self-directed education. And then they turned out much better than I even imagined. They are doing amazing things, but it wasn't anything I did. It was just the fact that they got to drive their own education. So thank you for joining this session. We have a few minutes for Q&A. We're going to also have a session next week again, every Wednesday at 7 o'clock Mountain Time.
And what's the topic for next week's? I'm so excited about this one.
Yes, we're going to talk about time management.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about how to make all this work. Everyone thinks that homeschooling moms have to be super moms, but they don't. And we're gonna talk about how learning comes from a multiple of ways for your children, and part of that is life skills. I sent a son off to California yesterday. And when I sent my son off to Russia, it was the same thing. I never worried that they didn't know how to do laundry, didn't know how to cook for themselves. And so we're going to talk about that those life skills are also very important, but they're helpful for you as a parent to be able to do more. So we're preparing them for their future, but we're also helping you as a parent have more time. So
I can't lie. I am so excited about this one. I mean, you say this is just for, I mean, you kind of said it's for both, but like, I suck at time. I'm the worst at time management. So I will be here with bells on next week.
Well, the older I get, the worse I get at it too. So I teach because, I need that refresher all the time. So anyway, Any questions or?
Taylina, Katie, you got anything for us? Taylina, going back to your comment about frustration in homeschooling, she says, we have PE time when the kids get frustrated. Yeah. And I think my family, we do just free time, which is go outside, play, jump around, read books. I think my son plays Legos or something. It's just to let him relax a little bit.
Yeah. And in fact, that's what we are going to talk about, that in time management. I think that's really important when we're putting together our schedule, that we schedule in some downtime. I think that drove me to depression, because I was constantly going. And I think implementing that downtime, showing your kids how to take some personal time for themselves is also super important. And it actually can help with their learning as well. We'll talk about that a little bit. Our brains aren't meant to be going 24/7. They're like little filing cabinets, and you need time to decompress and to absorb that information. And when we don't give kids that information, it starts just like going. It's like that show. What's that show? I love that show. I can't remember where she's got the filing cabinet and the guys are just like dumping the information. That can happen a lot. What's Inside Out? That's the show.
I have not seen that one. So
you should see it. It's good.
Is that the like Pixar movie or whatever?
Yeah, no. Especially the girl from, let's see, Parks and Rec was the the main, and I think if you've ever struggled with anxiety or depression,
Oh,
I think it's
yes.
a super powerful show too. So
Yep, absolutely.
anyway, so yeah, be sure to join us next week for this time management. So
It's going to be good. All right.
and share our classes. Like I said, I'd love to see this community grow. So
All right.
all right.
Well, let's see. Let's check the comments before we leave. Let's see. Yeah. Taylene just says, I found that you don't need 6 hours like public schools do. We get stuff done in 1.5 hours and then do things for life skills throughout
That's
the
awesome.
day. Absolutely.
That's great.
We found that too. You can get so much more done when you don't have to like line up for hall duty. You don't have to wait for bathroom breaks. You don't have to do any of that. Get your prep.
I heard parents getting chastised from their teachers last year that they weren't doing from 8 to 3 schooling. And the mom's like, why do we have to do that? And that's exactly true. You don't have to, we don't realize how much time that is wasted in public school just herding kids around. So that's very true. You can get a lot more done. Absolutely. And give your children a lot more freedom.
Yep, sure. That's what it's all about. So
yeah. So.
All right. Well, Taylene and Katie, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next week. And again, next week's class is going to be killer too. So we'll see y'all next week.
All right. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.